Welcome to the legislative update for the week ending Friday, September 10th. My name is Colleen Patterson, and I'm the Director of Employer Services and Compliance at Savoy. The big news this week came on Thursday, September 9th, when President Biden announced an executive order that was addressing federal workers and contractors, but also outlined a multi-step plan implementing new policies to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Although the plan includes measures that were focused on multiple areas, such as protecting already vaccinated individuals, keeping schools safely open, increasing access to testing, and there was a few other items in there, I really wanted to focus our time today on the policies that may directly affect employers and require action. While the president's remarks and the administration's corresponding plan suggest a vaccine mandate, the president's executive order does not explicitly mandate a vaccination requirement. The requirement, however, is expected to be established by the Safer Federal Workforce Task Force and an emergency temporary standard to be issued by the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and we all know that to be OSHA. So let's go over a couple of key points. The executive order will require all federal executive branch workers to be vaccinated and directed that this standard be extended to employees of contractors that do business with the federal government. So that's the purpose of that Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. They're going to determine what that requirement is. Next, the plan addresses all private sector employers with more than 100 employees will be required to ensure that their workers are either vaccinated or tested weekly for COVID-19. In addition, the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, again, that's OSHA, will issue an emergency temporary standard to implement this requirement. The OSHA rule will also require employers with more than 100 employees to provide paid time off for the time it takes for workers to get vaccinated or to recover from any side effects of the vaccination. Lastly, the vaccination requirement will also apply to healthcare workers at a Medicare or Medicaid participating hospitals and other healthcare settings that receive Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement. So with all of this, many details aren't available yet regarding these requirements because we have several things that we're waiting on, and that includes the effective date. So we were not really going to know too much until OSHA issues their emergency temporary standard or if any other guidance is issued as well. What we've been getting questions about is how does OSHA factor into this, and is this something that is actually allowed? So let's go over a little bit of background about OSHA. OSHA is authorized to issue emergency temporary standards under limited conditions, specifically when it has determined that workers may be in grave danger and a new standard is necessary for their protection in the workplace. After initial publication in the Federal Register, the temporary standard follows any of the other usual rulemaking procedures in order for it to become a permanent standard. And the timeline for that is typically for a final ruling, it happens within 6 months of when it's published in the Federal Register. Lastly, the emergency temporary standard may be challenged in an appropriate U.S. Court of Appeals. So over the next several weeks and maybe even months, we're going to be hearing more guidance as it's being released. But during that time, there could continue to be some appeals happening as well that could impact what the final outcome ends up being. So with all of this being said, what can employers do now to prepare? Well, the plan that was outlined by President Biden, it's really broad and it's pending the emergency temporary standard from OSHA. In the meantime, employers, including federal contractors, because this applies to them as well, they really should start evaluating coverage under any of the mandates, and they want to work with counsel to develop and implement a compliant program. And that program really has to include any necessary and appropriate policies to ensure that they comply with federal, state, and local laws. So although we're pending some information, it's really the time to take a look at what do employers have in place and what are they going to need in order to comply as information is released. So depending upon the scope of the emergency temporary standard that we're pending release from OSHA, there may be additional issues under other laws, such as the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, but it also could impact state wage and hours laws too. So more information is sure to come and guidance is sure to be extensive. The other thing that I wanted to mention here too is any unionized employers, they really have to be mindful of how these directives may impact their obligations under collective bargaining agreements, or whether a vaccine program would be a mandatory subject of bargaining. So more to come there as well. The last thing that I wanted to mention here today is that employers really also should be taking careful steps to address employee and applicant requests for a reasonable accommodation under both the Americans with Disabilities Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, if requiring vaccination as a condition of employment. And again, that's something that should be addressed in the overall compliance program that employers should be putting together to be able to comply with all of these new mandates and requirements that are going to be coming down the pike. So stay tuned for more guidance because it is sure to be released in the coming weeks. This concludes our update for this week. As always, should you have any questions, please reach out to your dedicated Savoy team and continue to use the resources available on our website at savoyassociates.com. From all of us at Savoy, stay healthy and safe. Thank you for joining us today.